The power of your absence. Why silence speaks louder than words. They always come back. But why? It's not a coincidence. Not magic. Not even love, at least not the kind you hoped it was. It's energy. It's psychology. It's the unconscious bond that silence reveals and words often conceal. And this truth, this ache you feel when they leave, this confusion when they return just as you begin to let go. Carl Jung understood it better than most. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. So why do they come back when you finally stop reaching out? Why do they reappear when your heart begins to heal? Let's go deeper. The magnetism of absence. When you withdraw your energy, your attention, your presence, your longing, you create a psychic vacuum. Not a void of indifference, but a silence that speaks. The kind of silence that echoes in the unconscious of the person who once took you for granted. Because now, you're no longer in their control. You're no longer orbiting their emotional gravity. And the absence of your energy forces them to feel the weight of their own. This is not manipulation. It's a mirror. When you disappear, what they really confront is the part of themselves they once projected onto you. And that confrontation is unbearable. The Jungian concept of projection. Carl Jung taught that what we don't own within ourselves, we project onto others. Love, power, worth, desire. They saw something in you, something they couldn't fully understand, but deeply needed. And instead of facing their own emptiness, they fed off your light. But when you stop chasing, when you break contact, they're no longer feeding, they're starving. They mistake it for missing you. But what they're really missing is the version of themselves they were able to feel when you were still trying to fix, rescue, or prove your love. You didn't just walk away. You removed the mirror, and now they're staring at their own void, without a reflection to soothe it. That's why they come back. Silence, the unconscious trigger. In a world obsessed with words, silence is sacred. It unsettles people. It exposes patterns. It leaves space for projection to collapse in on itself. Most people aren't afraid of rejection. They're afraid of being forgotten. And your silence, it feels like psychic death. They didn't think you'd actually move on. They expected you to wait, to explain, to beg, to orbit. But now you've done the one thing they weren't prepared for. You became the unknown, and what Jung called the shadow, the denied, rejected parts of the psyche, gets activated by mystery. You become a haunting absence, a silence that speaks of power, not pain. And that silence is louder than any "please come back" could ever be. The law of emotional gravity. Think of it this way. When you constantly reach out, you're chasing. When you explain your worth, you're pleading. When you refuse to detach, you're surrendering your energy. But the moment you pull back, not out of revenge, but from self-respect, you shift the emotional gravity. And now they feel the pull, because human beings don't value what's always available. They crave what they have to reach for. What was once taken for granted now becomes hauntingly valuable in your absence. Not because you changed, but because you stopped giving what they didn't know how to hold. Jung's warning: don't mistake their return for love. But here's where it gets dangerous. Jung warned that when the unconscious returns in the form of emotion, it can feel overwhelmingly real, but it's not always rooted in truth. So, when they come back, don't confuse it for redemption. Don't rush to believe it means they've changed. They may not be coming back for you. They may be coming back to silence their discomfort, to restore control, to escape the consequences of losing you. Jung would ask you to ask them, which part of me are you returning for? The real me, or the role I used to play in your life? Because unless they've faced their shadow, unless they've done the work to heal their wounds, they're not returning with love. They're returning with need. And there's a difference. You are the catalyst, not the cure. Maybe you were never meant to be their home, but they're awakening. Maybe your silence was the first time they ever heard their own loneliness. Maybe your absence cracked something open in them that no amount of presence ever could. But hear this: you are not responsible for what they do with that awakening. You were the mirror. the light, the lesson, the one who walked away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. That's the kind of power they never forget. And that's why they come back. The return isn't the reward. Your peace is. What their return really means: trauma bonds, soul ties, and the illusion of change. They're back. They say they've changed. They miss you. They finally see your worth. But deep down, something still doesn't feel right. Not fully. Not in your body. Not in your soul. Why? Because their return is not always a return to love. It's often a return to what's familiar. And familiarity is not the same as safety. It's not the same as healing. And it's not the same as truth. The trauma bond dressed as love. What if I told you that the pull you feel, the ache in your chest, the relief when their name lights up your screen again, isn't love? It's a trauma bond. A cycle of emotional highs and lows that floods your nervous system with adrenaline and longing. A pattern where unpredictability masquerades as passion and chaos gets confused with chemistry. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. So, instead of healing, they come back to relive. Instead of integrating their shadow, they seek to recreate the same drama, just with new promises. They're not returning out of wholeness. They're returning from wounding. And if your wounds match theirs, you call it fate. The myth of sudden change. They say they've grown. They say they understand now. They say they're ready. But growth isn't measured in apologies. It's measured in patterns. A person doesn't change because they miss you. They change because they've faced themselves. Because they've done the inner work. Because they've looked their shadow in the eye and didn't flinch. Carl Jung called this process individuation, becoming whole by integrating the disowned parts of the self. But most people don't do that. They just chase comfort. They avoid guilt. They return not out of transformation, but because your distance has become unbearable. That's not love. That's possession. That's emptiness looking for a place to hide. Soul ties and psychic imprints. Still, the bond feels real, undeniable, even spiritual. That's because soul ties are not just poetic. They are psychic imprints. Every time you connected, every time you forgave what hurt, every time you opened your heart hoping this time would be different, you built a thread. And even now, that thread might still hum beneath your skin. But here's what Jung would remind you. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And sometimes, people come back not to connect with you, but to escape themselves. They crave what you represent, not who you are. Your empathy, your stability, your light. They don't want to do their inner work. They just want the relief of your presence. And they'll confuse that relief with love. But you know better now. Why you still feel drawn to them. The bond doesn't break just because the person is wrong for you. It doesn't vanish because you know they're bad for your peace. Because that bond is not in your mind. It's in your nervous system. You learned to attach through chaos. You learned to crave what's inconsistent. Because at some point, maybe in childhood, you learned that love was something you earned, not received. And so, their return feels like proof. Proof that you were finally enough. Proof that your pain had meaning. Proof that if you just love harder this time, maybe it'll stick. But love built on suffering isn't love. It's bondage. When the shadow craves the familiar. Carl Jung warned us that the shadow, the repressed parts of ourselves, will draw us back to what hurt us. If we haven't brought it to light, you don't just fall back into their arms. You fall back into your old self. The one who tolerated too much. The one who needed to be chosen to feel worthy. The one who kept hoping their chaos would turn into care. And they don't just come back to see who you are now. They come back hoping you haven't changed. Because your evolution threatens their comfort. Your boundaries interrupt their access. Your detachment breaks the spell. And so they plead. They cry. They say all the right things. But if you pay attention, you'll notice something. They're talking to the version of you that no longer exists. The test of return. Sometimes their return is not a test of their love. It's a test of yours. Not for them, but for you. Will you choose peace over potential? Will you honor how far you've come? Will you trust the silence more than the promises? This isn't about bitterness. It's about boundaries. This isn't about punishing them. It's about protecting you. Because if they haven't changed, they're not coming back to stay. They're coming back to repeat. And cycles and broken don't lead to healing. They lead to heartbreak with better excuses. They come back to what you used to tolerate, not what you've become. So breathe, step back, ask your inner self, the one who lived through the chaos. Do I want the fantasy, or do I want freedom? Why you still feel attached, trauma bonding, and met childhood needs, and the inner child's longing. You know they're not good for you. You know the cycle. You know how it ends. And still, you check your phone. Still, your heart skips when they call. Still, you ask yourself, why can't I just let go? The answer isn't weakness. It isn't foolishness. And it definitely isn't love. It's trauma bonding. And it starts long before they ever showed up. The inner child's first love story. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. And you will call it fate. And this attachment to someone who hurts you, who leaves, then returns, who gives just enough to keep you hoping. It feels like fate, but it's not fate. It's familiarity. It's the nervous system remembering what it learned when you were too young to protect yourself. It's your inner child reaching out to the first people who taught you what love meant, even if that love came with fear, inconsistency, or abandonment. Because here's the truth. We don't bond with people who treat us well. We bond with people who feel familiar, even if that familiarity is pain. How emotional addiction forms. When a child is raised in emotional unpredictability, one moment nurtured, the next neglected, they begin to internalize a toxic rule. If I just try hard enough, they'll love me again. And this is how it begins. The reward becomes the relief. Love becomes a pursuit. Worth becomes a performance. Now fast forward to adulthood. Someone gives you just enough to feel seen, then disappears, then comes back, and your brain releases dopamine. Not from the love itself, but from the relief of the reconnection. It's the same emotional rhythm you knew as a child, and it creates addiction, not affection. Trauma bonding versus real connection. Let's be clear, real connection is built on safety, trust, consistency, growth, but trauma bonds, they thrive in the opposite. They're built on emotional highs and lows, love mixed with anxiety, longing mistaken for loyalty, fear of abandonment disguised as intensity, and worst of all, they make you believe that your love can fix them. But that's not love, that's trauma wearing perfume. The psychological trap of almost. One of the hardest bonds to break is not to someone who treated you horribly, but to someone who gave you glimpses of what you needed, then snatched it away. They were almost available, almost vulnerable, almost ready, and that almost hooks your inner child, because it mirrors the parent who was almost present, almost safe, almost loving. You weren't chasing them. You were chasing closure. You weren't craving them. You were craving your own healing. Carl Jung spoke of the wounded archetypes that live within us, and the child who loves someone unavailable becomes the adult who confuses pain with passion. The illusion of the one. When someone leaves, then comes back, they feel powerful, larger than life, fated. You begin to think, maybe this is proof we're soulmates. Maybe it was always meant to be. But pause, look deeper. You're not craving them. You're craving the feeling of being chosen. And when someone who hurt you returns, that feeling is intoxicating, not because it's right, but because your inner child finally feels seen. But it's an illusion, because they're not returning to love you. They're returning to the version of you that still needs them to feel whole. What Jung would tell you now. Jung would not tell you to chase them. He would not tell you it's your twin flame. He would not tell you to romanticize their return. He would say, who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. This ache, this longing, it's not about them. It's a summons from your soul to look inward, to meet your inner child, to hold her, to grieve what she never got, and to finally give her the safety she keeps trying to find in people who can't provide it. They always come back, but you don't always have to answer, because your healing is not found in their arms. It's found in your own. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You're choosing yourself, reclaiming wholeness, what real love looks like after betrayal. You survived. You survived the silence, the confusion, the promises that led nowhere, the return that brought more questions than peace. But this is not the end of your story. This is where it begins. Not with their words, not with their return, but with your reclamation of peace, of clarity, of yourself. Yourself. Wholeness isn't found in their apology. You may still wonder, what if they were sincere this time? But you don't need to find closure in their mouth. You find closure in your mirror. Carl Jung wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Closure isn't when they say sorry. It's when you realize you don't need them to, because the healing you seek was never going to come from the person who broke you. It was always going to come from within. Real love doesn't confuse you. Let's talk about something we rarely do. Real love, not intensity, not emotional roller coasters, not maybe this time at work. Real love is safe, present, predictable, not in a boring way, but in a grounded way. You don't question your worth in real love. You don't chase it. You don't beg it to see you. Real love sees you, even in silence, even in your shadows, even when you're not trying to be perfect. And when you finally experience that, the chaos you used to mistake for passion feels like poison in comparison. When you love yourself, you stop entertaining inconsistency. Loving yourself isn't just taking bubble baths or writing affirmations. It's holding yourself when you're tempted to go back. It's whispering, "We don't do that anymore," when the old patterns knock on your door. It's not easy, because self-love is reparenting. It's comforting the child in you who thought she had to earn her worth. It's reminding her, you are enough, even when they don't come back. Carl Jung understood that self-love isn't surface. It's integration, bringing the rejected parts of yourself home, learning to sit with the parts of you that once felt unlovable, and saying, "You're safe now." That's the kind of love that never leaves. What healing actually looks like. Healing isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's not a grand "I'm over it" moment. It's subtle, quiet, still. It looks like waking up and no longer checking your phone for their name, hearing a love song and not thinking of them, feeling peace when you're alone, not needing them to return to feel whole. Healing looks like remembering who you were before the wound and creating space for who you are becoming now, what you deserve and must now protect. You deserve love that shows up, love that feels safe, love that grows with you. You deserve someone who doesn't wait to lose you to value you, doesn't confuse your softness for weakness, doesn't use your empathy to avoid their healing. And most of all, you deserve to be chosen, without conditions, without games, without disappearing acts. But to receive that love, you must first give it to yourself, and that means walking away from what once felt like home, but was really a house of mirrors, reflecting your old pain. The final test, choosing you. They came back. They always do. But this time, you're different. You see the pattern. You hear the words, but you no longer believe the spell. You feel the pull, but you don't respond from emptiness. Because you're full now. Because your wholeness is no longer negotiable. Because you've met the most important person in this story, yourself. And she's not going back. Not this time. They didn't change. You did. If this resonated, if something in your soul whispered finally, then this isn't the end. It's a beginning. Like this video, if it helped you see clearer, share it with someone who's still waiting for their closure. And most of all, subscribe for more insights from Jungian psychology, emotional healing, and soul-deep transformation. You've waited long enough for someone to come back. Now it's time you come home to yourself. Subscribe for more healing. Your soul is listening.